Chocolate. Chocolate's a funny one. It's everywhere. We all love it. You can buy it in any shop. But there's conflicting information about chocolate. Sometimes you hear it's good for you. Sometimes you hear it's not so good for you. And if you talk to a vet, they'll tell you it's really bad for your dogs. There's dark chocolate, there's white chocolate, milk chocolate. We've got crumbly, smooth. We've got cold, we've got hot. There's just so many options with chocolate. And everybody has their own favorite way of eating it. Today, I'm going to meet with an expert who's going to help us solve some of the mysteries of chocolate. And I can't wait. So welcome everyone. I'm delighted to be here with Christine from Anyone for Science, who's going to bring us on a journey through the science of chocolate.
Hi Craig, you're very welcome. Delighted to be here doing this with you. So we're going to think about chocolate today, where it comes from, and the journey it goes on to get to the supermarket and on the supermarket shelves. So it starts, the cocoa beans grow on plants close to the equator. These here are some cocoa beans. They grow in large pods. So if I was describing them to somebody without actually being able to show them, I would describe them as being about the same size as broad beans. And they have a shell on the outside of them. Now these ones have been fermented in the sun, and I can feel actually this one, the shell is quite brittle on it, so I'm going to break the shell off this one and show you what they're like underneath the shell. So underneath the shell, coming up here, we have this other part here, and I'm going to just see if it'll break for me. Oh yeah, this here. Now this is called the nib, the inside of the bean. And what I have in this bowl here is actually the broken up parts of the nib, because the shell is discarded and it's just the nib part, this part here, it's been broken up, is the bits that are used for eating.
And that looks quite like chocolate. I mean, I think I could put my hand in there and pop it in my mouth right now.
Yeah, it looks like chocolate chips, doesn't it? It looks like chocolate chips. Well, you're welcome to try, but you'll find that it's not chocolate.
It's really bitter and crunchy.
Really bitter, yeah, crunchy, hard. Right. So what happens next, and what is probably not so obvious about this is that these beans, they're actually quite high in fat concentration and content. So the next step is to actually press them, and when you press them, cocoa butter, which people have probably heard of, comes out, and this is a piece of cocoa butter.
That's pretty impressive looking.
It is. It looks similar to a lump of lard, doesn't it, really? Yeah. And so it's like quite a lot of beans and a lot of plants have quite high oil contents, like olives and olive oil. You've got avocados and avocado oil. These beans, cocoa beans, are no exception.
So it's just a natural oil.
A natural oil, yeah. So it's a vegetable fat.
Okay.
That's come because these are vegetable materials, and that's. Now, once the oil or the butter is pressed out, the fat is pressed out, then you're left with a drier nib, and that's ground down, and that's ground to give us cocoa powder.
That's much more familiar.
More familiar to you. So people, when they're baking, they probably put that into cakes, making chocolate cake. Now, what we do in Ireland to make our chocolate has a slightly different step now to what our European friends do when they're making their chocolate. In Europe, they just combine this powder back with the fat that they have expressed, and that makes their chocolate. It's what we call dark chocolate.
Okay.
But we have another step. We send this to a factory where we mix this with milk and sugar, and we make what's called chocolate crumb. And you end up with something that's a bit like drinking chocolate.
Okay, so it's kind of a whiter...
A whiter colour.
Okay.
So this is what it's like. And so what I've set out on the table actually is what the constituent parts of different types of chocolate. So probably this one here is for our milk chocolate, and probably to have put this into the bag instead of the cocoa powder would be slightly more realistic of what
you'd have your milk powder in there.
Yeah. So the the chocolate, the crumb, it's kind of the closest thing I can describe it as is a bit like pumice. And then that's ground back to a powder, like the drinking chocolate is there. And that is what is added with the cocoa butter to make milk chocolate.
Okay. So that's milk chocolate, and that's what most Irish people would identify as chocolate. And,
It is.
And it's what we're used to eating.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, when we joined the EU, that was one of the issues for discussion, that in Ireland and the UK and in Denmark, we called chocolate what we know as milk chocolate. They called milk chocolate. And what we called dark chocolate, they called chocolate. So we had to get special permission to continue to call our chocolate chocolate. And that's one of the things that, so how we worked it all out with the EU and came to an agreement of what was what.
That's, different cultures, different ideas. And when you come together, you have to figure out a way to find a happy middle ground. So.
That's it, exactly, yeah.
So down the front, you mentioned you've got kind of 3 different combinations down here. Can you explain what the different ones are?
Yeah. So for us, as I said, this is what we consider our chocolate. There should be a bit of milk to go with it, so I'm just going to put the milk beside it, but there should be some milk, and there's the cocoa fat, sugar, and the cocoa powder.
And these are all about an average size bar?
Yeah, that's enough. There's enough in that. This is to make a 50-gram bar, about that size. Yeah, exactly. And this one here is enough to make a 50-gram bar of, white chocolate. Now, so question, is white chocolate chocolate at all? Because there's no cocoa powder in it. So what it has? It has the cocoa butter and sugar, and those two are just combined to make white chocolate. Now, the cocoa fat on its own, the cocoa butter, it looks like white chocolate.
It does. I'm looking at that, I'm thinking I could take a little bit of that and try it, and it'll taste just like white chocolate.
So you can have a little taste. Can you manage?
I can. I mean, it breaks like white chocolate, it looks like it. Are you sure it's not white chocolate?
You could be.
No, that's not white chocolate.
Not white chocolate.
Definitely not white chocolate.
As it's lacking in sweetness, so it's very, very bitter. Yeah. So that's, and if you go, whether it's chocolate or not, I know we sell it as chocolate. People eat it as chocolate, but for me, it's not chocolate unless it has cocoa powder in it.
Fair enough.
Then on this side of the table, you have this. This is for making dark chocolate or European chocolate. And what's different about it is that it has so much more cocoa powder in it. So if you compare the two, when they're down the table, it's hard to see. But when I stand them up, you can see that there must be about twice in this one what there is in this, for the same, making the same amount of, same size or weight of chocolate bar.
So these are the ones in a shop, you'll see them, they're 70, 80, sometimes even 90% cocoa.
Yes, yeah, they are, yeah. And that's what this is to make. The other interesting thing on them is when you look at the sugar. So the opposite is true for the sugar. The milk chocolate has more sugar than the dark chocolate has.
And I mentioned in the introduction that there are some people would say chocolate is good for you, some would say it's very bad for you. Does that sort of breakdown link in with the health effects of chocolate?
For sure, yeah. So the aspect, the sugar of the chocolate is bad for you, it is the sugar. And the sugar, so there's almost, I'll show you the exact percentages, but there's a lot more in the milk chocolate than there is in the darker chocolate. So sugar and fat, neither of them are really on our list of things that we should be eating lots and lots of, that we should be careful with both of them. But there's more sugar in milk chocolate than there is in dark chocolate.
Okay. So what is it about chocolate that makes us tick? As you've already heard, chocolate, or more specifically cocoa, is a natural product from the cacao plant. And plants produce lots of what we call biologically active molecules, which just means that they can change how the cells in our body behave. When it comes to chocolate, the main biologically active molecules we're interested in are two methylxanthines called theobromine and caffeine, a number of different polyphenols, and phenylethylamine. Methylxanthines are a family of naturally produced molecules which have been a major source of medicines for humans in treating asthma and other respiratory illnesses. Theobromine and caffeine are both psychoactive, meaning that they can have effects on your brain, and they're classified as stimulants, which means that they generally speed up neurological processes. Most people are familiar with caffeine's effects in causing alertness, staving off drowsiness, and increasing focus. Caffeine and theobromine are very similar when you look at their chemical structures, and theobromine can have similar effects. But because of the slight difference in their structure, theobromine tends to not get into the brain as efficiently as caffeine. So it has its effect more in the rest of the body, causing blood vessels to relax, which in turn lowers your blood pressure and gives a more relaxing effect. Because there's a lot more theobromine in chocolate than caffeine, chocolate will give you a much more mellow, relaxed feeling compared to the go-go-go effect of coffee. Polyphenols are generally classified as being anti-inflammatory and antioxidant. Because they are found in high levels in cocoa, that's the basis for many of the suggested health benefits of chocolate. And indeed, some beneficial effects on brain, cardiovascular, and even metabolic activity have been seen in properly conducted trials with chocolate. The final chemical of interest is called phenylethylamine, which is often referred to as the love drug. That's because it causes very similar neural activity in the brain to what we see in the brains of people who have just fallen in love. Things like increased dopamine release. But when we eat phenylethylamine, like we do with chocolate, it doesn't really get into our brains in high quantities. So it's much more likely the sugar that's been added to chocolate that causes the warm fuzzy feelings, as it has very similar effects on dopamine in the brain. So I'd really like to know, what is it that people like about chocolate? What is it that appeals to people, and I suppose for the most popular brands, what are the desirable qualities?
Well, I suppose there's lots of things about chocolate that appeal, for sure. I know you've talked about the chemical aspect of it and the chemistry and how it interacts with your body. My interest is also in the physical part of the bar, the whole physical, I'm going to say, chemistry of it, the whole around the physics of it. So one of the first things when you open the bar is the glossiness, that it has that glossy appearance is very nice in the chocolate bar.
Let's try this one and see how it measures up.
And it's that glossiness that actually helps in the manufacturing process as well. So it's nice and shiny. Now that comes from the fat. It's very interesting, the cocoa butter. It has different melting points. And you want, for the chocolate, you want it to have a melting point around about 37, around about your mouth temperature.
Okay.
And so there's a big process that's gone through in the factory to what they call temper the chocolate, to make sure that that is the form of fat that is the one that solidifies in your bar. Now, there are other forms, and you might have seen them. So sometimes if you leave a bar of chocolate in the window of a sunny window, in the car, for example, and it's melted and then it's gone hard again on a cooler day, you open it, and you see there's like a white bloom on it, is what it's called. It really looks like it's mouldy. Okay. But in fact, it's not molded at all. It's just that it has crystallized or solidified in a different fat form. The fat form, so that the number 5, the one that you want in the chocolate bar that has the nice glossy appearance, it also has a very nice mouth feel. Now, mouth feel is a feel in the mouth. Mouth feel is how the industry kind of would describe how it feels in your mouth. So that hard crispness, that comes from that aspect of the fat structure. And so that's, people like that. Some people like to store their chocolate in the fridge to even further accentuate that crispness to
Yeah,
the
I'm
chocolate.
firmly in that camp.
Yeah,
I get an
you're like-
Easter egg. First thing I do is I put it in the fridge. And then I tell everybody not to steal my Easter egg from
And
the
the
fridge.
Easter egg is interesting because the Easter egg is quite thin. So it has a lovely snap when
Yeah.
you break it. Now, the trend has been to move away from those thin bars to a chunkier kind of bar, like the one that you've opened here.
Yeah.
That has been, the trend has been that people like a chunkier bar. I'm not quite sure why, but that's people like that about it. And then when you get it into your mouth, the 37 is an interesting temperature for the melting point because that's the same temperature as our bodies.
Right.
So when you put it into your mouth, what was initially hard to bite, now suddenly it's becoming soft in your mouth and it's melting in your mouth.
So you've got 3 different types of chocolate down here.
Yeah.
And they're quite distinct in both in appearance and, the texture looks different.
Yes, we've brought a few different ones that have different mouth feels, and then they give a different, experience, eating experience. So if you take the one you have there, that's a bit of a galaxy.
Okay.
Now it's the most creamy, and what gives it its creaminess is the particle size of the cocoa. The cocoa has been ground to a very, very fine. It's ground to about 20 microns.
Okay.
Now, what's a micron? A micron is a millionth of a meter.
That's really, really small.
Small. So it's a thousandth of a millimeter. That might be an easier way of visualizing it. So those particles are just 20 microns. And if you put the chocolate to the roof of your mouth and rub it with your tongue, it's very, very, very smooth.
It's
Now,
just melting away.
melting away, very creamy. Now, and apparently that's supposed to be most popular with ladies. Women are supposed to think that is about it's marketed towards women
Okay.
mostly.
We won't get into the basis for that.
No. Then in the middle ground, and go try a piece of the dairy milk.
Okay.
And when you put it into your mouth and you rub it with your tongue, you should be able to feel that is...
It's stickier. It stays there longer. You need to chew it a bit as well.
Slightly grittier. So with your tongue, I think it's fascinating, with your tongue you can taste the difference, and the particles in that are around about 30 microns. So your body is able to tell the difference between a 20 micron particle and a 30 micron particle with your tongue. Even though there's no way you'd see that with your eye. You'd want to be looking at that with a microscope to see that. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So we have really fine sensors on our tongue, and you can
Really
detect
fine sensors, that you can feel that between the roof of your mouth, you can feel those particles. Like, if you eat something sandy. And then the flake is even more sandy. It's probably around about 40 microns. I mean, you feel that'll feel quite rough in your mouth.
Right. I'm going for it because these are my favourite.
Oh, you like them? Yeah.
You can almost feel air in that.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of air,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have the same crispness that the bars have, for sure. Yeah, because it's a much thinner film of chocolate. Yeah.
So, Christine, you mentioned earlier on something really interesting, that the chocolate industry 37 degrees is a magic temperature because it's body temperature, and when you put chocolate in your mouth at that temperature, that's when the magic happens. Yeah. So a lot of people watching, they've probably melted chocolate themselves or tried to make sauces or even Rice Krispie buns, and it doesn't always go right.
Okay, yeah, that is true. It doesn't always go right. And I suppose sometimes it's even hard to know, has your chocolate melted? So one of the things that I think is very interesting about the chocolate is that it doesn't melt. A cube of chocolate doesn't melt in the same way a cube of ice melts, where it just runs all over the place. Chocolate has what's called a yield strength. So it's kind of, the molecules hold on to each other until you apply enough force to break that attraction between the molecules. So here's one I've heated up earlier. I've melted this, and this square of chocolate is, I think, melted. But
that looks pretty normal.
It looks normal. It just looks like nothing has happened to it.
You can still read the writing on it.
Yeah, you can indeed. Now, when the chocolate is dispensed, in the bar production, as it's put into the molds, There's a nozzle for each square, and you can see on the back of that. Now then the next thing they do is they tap it. So as it taps, it should flow. And now, I've exceeded the yield strength, so quite a lot of tapping is needed to make a nice, smooth back. Is that enough for us for the moment? I think it certainly gives you the idea. So that was our piece of chocolate that was there, and it looked like it was just a solid lump of chocolate, but actually it had already turned into a liquid, but just hadn't started to flow yet.
All right. So that's so. I suppose when you heat it up, chocolate does funny things.
It does.
And I know myself, we love eating ice cream on a Sunday. Sometimes we've nothing to go with it, and we throw a bar of ice cream a bar of chocolate into a bowl. We melt it down, and we try to make some chocolate sauce. And we've noticed before, if a little bit of water gets in, that's not a good thing either.
Yeah, so if a bit of water gets into the chocolate, a small bit of water makes it all lumpy. And and you certainly don't want that in your chocolate sauce. But there is, as I learned when I was working in the chocolate industry, there is a way that you can make chocolate sauce by add water into your chocolate. And so how we discovered it was a restaurateur came and to complain about a batch of chocolate that he was working with, and the chocolate sauce that he was trying to make from it, it wasn't working. Now, I don't know if we ever got to the bottom of why it wasn't working, but we, like you, we're absolutely astounded. What do you think when you put water into chocolate? It just goes lumpy. They're not compatible. I mean, one of them is the water is aqueous and the chocolate is not, and they just do not mix. It's a bit like putting oil on water, you know. But he insisted, and that's what he always did, that he made his chocolate with water and sugar, and that he managed to make fine chocolate sauce.
A little bit of chocolate magic.
We tried to recreate that, and I'm going to show you now what we did and how we recreate the chocolate sauce, so the next time you're making chocolate sauce of your Sunday dinner, that you should be able to do that.
That sounds good. We'll save a few calories on the cream.
Okay, so we're going to start making some chocolate sauce. I'm going to show you how you do it. So you need to start off, I've emptied the water out of this. I know I used it for melting that earlier, so that's emptied out. And I'm going to put a small bit of water in. Now, I probably should be measuring, a good scientific way of measuring this, but I'm just going to, that's probably a bit much. I've covered the bottom of the saucepan. I'm going to pour a little bit of that out. So I'm going to put, but if I end up that I've got too much water, what I just do is add a bit more chocolate in to balance it all out at the end. So you start with the water. And then the next thing I'm going to add is some icing sugar. And you probably don't actually need that when you think about how much sugar we already have in the chocolate, but this is the restaurant method that we were trying to replicate.
Maybe that's the secret.
Maybe it's the secret, I think not. So I'm going to put for 2 spoons of sugar. There we go, in there. Now, so I'm just going to heat it gently.
So you're dissolving the sugar in the
Just dissolving the sugar in the water, yeah. And then the next thing I'm going to do is put in some chocolate. So maybe you'd pass me that bar there.
Let's get that started off.
Excellent, thank you very much. And now this is a 200-gram bar. I'm going to try to see if we can go for about 50 grams, but I'd say I'll probably end up putting in about 100 grams. So what I do is I just gently stir it as the chocolate melts. And just keep stirring it so that it doesn't stick to the bottom. And this turns into the most delicious chocolate sauce.
I'm very interested to see how this turns out. I was dubious when I heard about water
I
and
know,
chocolate
yeah.
sauce.
So were we as chocolate makers. We were dubious about it too. We couldn't believe. We said, no wonder that chocolate sauce isn't working. But when we were assured that it always worked, except for one particular batch, that I don't think we ever got to the bottom of why. But I'm going to turn this down a little bit. So just gently melting it here.
That's coming together quite nicely.
Yeah.
And it is possible to burn chocolate.
It is possible to burn chocolate, it is indeed, yeah. And then it goes kind of crunchy. black
not in a good way.
carbon crunchy. No, not in a good way. Not in a good way. Oh, I'm going to turn that off. And I might just put a little bit more chocolate into that to thicken that up a little bit. Excellent. I'll pop both of those in and melt that up. And I suppose as I was thinking about this a little bit more, I mean, when you wash the chocolate pan out, hot water washes out the chocolate, and yeah, so I'm guessing that something similar, when you have if you have a very tiny amount of water, I think it poses a problem. But when you have enough water, then it works very well.
It works okay.
Yeah. So it's nearly melted, and then don't
So have you
overheat
any
it.
serving suggestions?
Ice cream. Or chocolate sponge cake.
That sounds good.
Yeah, because it doesn't go hard. This will stay soft. So this is just about ready for pouring. So even like I would store that in the fridge,
Right.
and you could walk past. If you store it with a spoon in the fridge, you could walk past. I have some water in that. I'll just pour that into my jug. I'll pour this in here. You could walk past and take a spoonful of chocolate out of the jug, and so. Here we go. There's
That
more
looks like
chocolate
pretty
sauce.
perfect chocolate sauce.
Yeah. I would vouch for it. It is tasty.
I think Willy Wonka would be proud of that. So Christine, this looks like I could take a little drink out of it.
Yeah, well, have a taste of it. It's probably quite warm still, and that means its viscosity is quite low, so it'll pour out. And interestingly, the drinks, chocolate as a drink was where chocolate started in Europe. So I think it was around, maybe perhaps religious thing, but people didn't drink alcohol for sure.
Okay.
They wanted an alternative drink, and I think that's how it started, and similar to coffee. Then it developed into a bar, and the bar has become the predominant way that we know of chocolate.
So the hot chocolate was the original form of the product.
The original product, it was
Great.
indeed.
Well, thank you very much, Christine.
You're very welcome.
It's been brilliant. I've learned so much about chocolate. So I want to say a big thank you to Christine from Anyone for Science.
You're very welcome.
It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed learning about chocolate and eating lots of chocolate as well this morning. I want to say a big thank you to our sponsors, Science Foundation Ireland and the Royal Society of Chemistry. And of course, this has been a Midland Science production. Midland Science are a small local development company based in the middle of Ireland. We promote science in schools and to the general public, and we raise awareness around science and science careers. And we'll see you again very soon.